Welcome to Streetwise Opera here in London. It's great to have you here and welcome to this talk today about nature and the environment.
Our nature project is called Nature, and we have been exploring songs from operas that have a connection with nature.
Songs is like the flowers duets from Lake Me and Where You Walk from Sydney reminds us how precious fragile nature is.
We're delighted to be joined by two experts today. Please, will you introduce yourselves?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really lovely to listen to some of your rehearsals just before this. My name is Lily, and I, at the moment, am working at Kew Gardens as a community learning producer. So I support people who face different barriers to engaging with nature to hopefully be able to do so. I'm very excited to talk with you, and I should also probably be careful and say that all opinions are mine rather than my organisation's, and I'll answer any questions as best I can.
Thanks, Lydia. My name is Gale Burns, it's a Canadian name, and I'm a speaker for Greenpeace. I've been that for several years, and I'm also advisor to them on climate distress, so people's feelings about the climate, just so that we work particularly with volunteers and with staff so that people working on the climate and things about biodiversity and nature don't burn out in the process of doing the work.
What can we do to make everyone more aware of the need to protect vulnerable nature?
Go ahead, Lily.
Okay. So I think it's really important to say here that regardless of who you are or what background you come from, it starts from each one of us individually. And I think that comes from our own ability to kind of learn about, connect to, and act on nature. So really in yourself and in your circle, start by demystifying what's out there. Like take that big blur of green and actually think, what is the natural world around you? What matters? What's meaningful? Try and understand the natural cycles that are happening around you in the world. It could be a little patch of wild meadow. It could be a London painting or street. You don't have to live somewhere hugely green and natural to connect. Really look at what interests you and your community as well. So again, like it might seem a little bit irrelevant or difficult for someone to really connect or feel like they care a lot about things that they don't know or don't see, that you can really translate to people changes that are happening on the ground as and where you are. And also just try and get ownership with what you have. So that might be deliberately kind of taking notice, connecting to the natural world around you. Citizen science is taking off in a massive way as well, including in big fancy research organizations. And that's where ordinary people are reporting back on and recording and journaling what's happening. So kind of using your own position to connect to the natural world around you and sharing that with others. And then finally, I guess, action when you specifically, I think as artists are really well placed to share this. You can use art and activism as a place to really help champion this message of care for the natural world. It could be with singing, it could be with performance, but you are in a unique place to help translate what isn't always communicated very well by scientists or by academics to people to show why it matters.
Yes, I completely agree with Lily. The starting point is really our own individual connection with nature. And if I do a long workshop on the climate or on biodiversity, we nearly always start with what are your memories of connecting with nature? But it sounds like you know the answer. I mean, arts are absolutely critical, and I'm hoping I get to see the opera when it's done. Anything that translates it into people's minds is great. The big threat, of course, is a mix of is the challenge to biodiversity that we're in real difficulty around that, and that's caused by a mix of climate change, deforestation, overfishing. But as I said, the first bit is connecting. I've got a friend, for example, who has decided to very carefully look after one particular plant as a way of just seeing how things go. But as Lily mentioned, there are some big projects now, monitoring birds across the UK, monitoring butterflies. So there are ways that you can get involved with other people. I always think it's great to do things with other people. We just had the UN Biodiversity Project, and although we're not really on target for what they said, they did do some really great things, which is that they worked out a mechanism or a plan at any rate for funding protecting nature, particularly in the global south. That's going to be one of the big challenges because, as I'm sure you know, the global south, we're facing things around climate ourselves, but the global south is going to bear quite a lot of the brunt of it, at least at this stage.
Oh, I need to state here that this is not my question. Now, they said, but this is just scripted one. So this is not my question, and it's just gathered from people's questions. And
Wait a second.
sorry, the camera is here. How effective are direct practical actions such as boycotts in making positive change? What action does your organization take or advocate?
It's such an interesting one. I think for me, there are almost a couple of different things to unpick here. So one is the kind of actions at large, right, that like an organization specifically can take and what they mean. I think one big thing is, like you as a person, you kind of have a reputation based on what your name does, right? And so as an organization, if you embed a culture of caring about the climate crisis and communicating this, about taking lived action. So at the moment, like we're stepping away massively from fossil fuels and towards reusable energy sources, even sort of small changes we can make with our visitors too, like encouraging people to go plant-based wherever possible and trying to make that a bit more affordable. And just really embedding in a culture that celebrates the natural world and celebrates climate. I think when we fall into the trap of maybe preaching lots or doing lots of policy work but don't actually live it, that has a huge impact. So we can kind of use our big sphere of influence there. And Kew has a very strong commitment to become carbon positive by 2030. So that means that we'll be basically emitting less carbon than we're sort of taking back in. We'll be producing a lot of natural energy as well. And then the second one I think is really interesting on an individual level about boycotts and about power. I think this is where the climate conversation it filters into lots of heavy discussion that's happening at the moment about how much power we might have as individuals. And actually the power in a boycott, both to organizations and to people, is in that reputational thing. It's not just the removing of however much you've got to spend, but it's making a point of showing and telling about it. And I absolutely do think that boycotts have a power, they have a purpose. People, I think, in our culture, it's very, very easy to kind of dismiss the amount of power that one person can have, or one consumer can have, or one purchaser can have. But actually, when we kind of join as collectives, when we make outward decisions, and when we tell companies, as well as with our pounds, but whether it's on social media, whether it's connecting with others, what we're not happy with, we do make a difference. I think there was surveying something like more than 50% of consumers, when they were asked across about 20 different countries, they were asked if a company was unsustainable, if it was causing climate harm, would that change what they're spending? So that's not like super woke, sciencey type people. That's just everyday people. And more than half of them said that they would change how they spend money based on climate. So it's not just one person by themselves. We're just kind of waiting for everyone. And we also know with boycotts in particular, one example I can say from Kew at least is, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Sackler family. So kind of quite controversial a few years ago. A source of funding for a lot of museums and galleries that had a legacy with lots of things being named after them. And actually, in hindsight, they weren't a very ethical place, should we just say. And so museums, galleries, and institutions like Kew had to go through a process of actually going, we don't want our name attached to or associated with this harm. So again, really, really highlights that actually people care, organizations care about how they're perceived. And you as a consumer, whether or not it's choosing to spend your money differently or shouting about it, can have a big impact. I think quite recently, last year, again, a different issue, but AXA were boycotted or part of BDS movements in relation to some of the additional sort of sources of funding and investment they'd made. And they were effective enough to change what they are doing as a big company. So yeah, don't be downtrodden. And also I'm very glad this is edited because I can talk for days, sorry.
And I like that as a strapline, don't be downtrodden, I think is great. I think, yeah, I agree completely. We're going to need all sorts of actions. And, we all have different lives, so we're all able to do different things and have different resources and so on. And I always think the one that gets missed out a lot is just having conversations with people about biodiversity and nature and the climate. because we're sort of, most of us, and I include myself in this, we're in some form of denial. Things, I don't want to scare you too much, but things are not looking good. We had committed ourselves to stay within 1.5 degrees of warming. And at the moment, by the end of the century, it looks like we'll get to 2.5. If that's the case, that'll be disastrous for nature in general. So we really do need to do something about it. It is reversible. The tricky thing is that we don't really know some of the key tipping points. So, for example, if the jet stream, the Gulf Stream, which controls our weather, stops functioning in the same way, it could be that we will have a climate more like Moscow's. And similarly, if the ice sheet of Greenland disappears, then that'll raise sea levels, but we don't know what the repercussions of that exactly are going to be. There are good signs where there are many more renewables than there used to be. They've increased more than they've ever been before. But it may surprise you to know that actually the fossil fuels has also increased. We really need to keep fossil fuels in the ground. And to be frank, the fossil fuel companies have really lied to us over decades. ExxonMobil, for example, knew decades ago and predicted pretty accurately what was going to happen with climate change, and pretended that that wasn't the case. And so we tend to be, I think, carrying on as if we can carry on the same way for decade after decade, and we just can't. We need radical change. There's no way that we're going to solve this solution without some quite radical change. So whether that's having a conversation with your next door neighbor or putting on an opera, we need to just try things. Now, Greenpeace, of course, has got a long history. It's over 50 years old, and we have three kind of elements. One is we do research so that we know that we're basing our actions on clear scientific information. We do lots of lobbying behind the scenes, and we also do direct action. So right at the beginning of our history, in 1972, we stopped nuclear testing in Alaska, for example. And more recently, the Global Ocean Treaty, it's got signed, and the idea is it'll create refuges for wildlife by 2030. So it's called the 3030 project. So 30% of the oceans will be protected by 2030. That's the plan. But we also do more public things. I don't know if you remember that we put those black sheets over Sunak's house. And got a lot of flack for it. The Conservative government at the time decided to refuse to speak to us. We're back in favour now, but we weren't then for a period. We put those black sheets because we were protesting at him opening up new oil fields. We really can't afford to do that. In the long run, I think the only thing that's really going to change this is mass action. You know, it's nice to see such a big bunch of people there, and we're going to need many, many more people, and we're going to need everybody. People don't realize that on a global level, it's very the issue of racism is absolutely key here. That we need to deal with, as white people need to deal with the racism that we've got imbued with, and we need to support Black and Indigenous people to lead us in this project. It's going to be really important because we need a united community of everybody, no matter what class, what sexuality, what ability, disability. And I'm sure it looks like you're a pretty diverse bunch, and that's the sort of thing. We need a really diverse group of people, big group of people to make big change.
Absolutely. I think, Gale, that you hit it on the head there, that it is about people coming together to do all of this stuff, people having discussions and dialogues, whether it's the people in the Streetwise Opera room now kind of getting together and rehearsing to share something, or whether it is policy and lobbying. All of this is actually about connecting with others and not just having a standalone one-off with the climate crisis.
Oh, hello. We think the majority of damage is being done by the very richest people and corporations, the 1%. How can we take that power and affect change?
Yeah. Shall I go first this time, Lily?
Yeah, if you'd like.
Well, I'm not sure I know the answer, but I mean, that's actually the interesting thing about this, is that we really don't know the answer. We know how to solve the problem of climate change, for example, and we know how to make sure that biodiversity doesn't, increases. But the question is, can we make that happen? That's the real question, I think. And it's true that the richest 1% account for more carbon emissions than the poorest 66%. And that will result in heat-related deaths of about 1.3 million people in the coming decades. People are already dying because of climate change and biodiversity loss, and that will increase. I mean, it's tough news. There are many positive things of people coming together, but there is some tough things, particularly happening in the global south. But in a funny way, I mean, although I think it's really important to get the resources, so we need to tax people who have wealth, but partly as a contribute, they need to contribute in the way we all need to contribute in ways that we can. But I'm not really in favor of finger pointing too much. I don't want to blame other people because it's a system issue. We need to change the system. I, for example, have a fairly wealthy brother, and he flies much more than I'd like him to fly. He eats steak, can you believe, 3 or 4 times a week. I mean, not good for his health amongst anything else. And I say, why to do that? Why do you do that? And he says, well, I think we're doomed anyway. So he's got the hopelessness, and many of us have that hopelessness. It's just he's got money and hopelessness, which makes it slightly different. So I'm trying to work with him to see if we can get him a little bit more hopeful so that he wants to change his habits. And already he's cut down one of his steak dinners during the week. Can you believe? So I don't want us to blame. Part of the problems we're having in America is that there's such a concentration of wealth now that the wealthy are really able to do huge and really inhuman things. As we see will happen in America and some other places as well. How do we affect change? Well, I think we unite. It's a bit like Lily says, we stick together. But part of it about reclaiming power, I mean, there is a way that we have to reclaim institutional power. I think we as a big body of people have to be in the streets long enough that no government dares do what we don't want. So we need to do that as a big group of people. But we also need to reclaim our own personal power, because most of us feel pretty small and like we can't do it. It's only me. And we really need to push each other on and nudge each other on to take bigger and bolder steps. We're going to need to take bold steps as are needed. And that's an ongoing project. I think we're all a bit scared of being bold, particularly in this country. We're going to need to encourage each other. So that's why I like the idea of singing, and singing, that's a way of being bold, I think. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you manage to do with that.
Yeah, really fantastic. I think that message of actually be encouraged and be united is so key when it comes to helping kind of ordinary people, lay people, engage with the climate crisis and actually make change. I think I completely agree with the question too. It's not a case of everyone feeling personally like they individually are responsible for the climate crisis, but actually, while the 1% might be affecting perhaps statistically more damage, you do have autonomy, you do have power fundamentally. So don't be disenfranchised by maybe feeling comparatively small in that, and actually the action that you take, the influence that you have over the people around you, and the measures that you can continue on with your entire life will have a difference. I guess one element of this is the power that you have as a consumer. And by that, I mean, you don't need to consume your way out of the climate crisis. I think especially when it comes to money and climate, we can often feel like, well, I can't afford to be eco-friendly. That sounds like something expensive. And I think companies have done quite well at greenwashing too. So there's a lot of stuff you'll see about like carbon offsetting, for example. If you buy a flight and buy an extra package, you'll do something else. But actually, where can you, instead of being a consumer, delve a little bit more into community, into uniting with others? So I think circular economies and kind of grassroots groups are a great example of this. You'll often have what are called scrap projects, so where people are sharing resources instead of sending them to landfill, especially for creatives. You'll also have a lot of kind of circular economy, upskilling, upcycling, kind of skill sharing workshops. And again, that point of helping teach someone else how to repair, mend, upgrade something instead of just consuming more and more and more. And then, of course, like other community support services like food pantries, soup kitchens, like things where people come together to share stuff that sits outside of kind of extra funding and extra money. And fundamentally, I think the people that cause the most damage to the climate, and particularly quite large consumer companies, they sort of rely on you feeling quite estranged and hopeless. It kind of feeds into that last question of taking action or not. If you think there's no point, I'll just go along with it, and everyone else does exactly the same thing, things maybe not be able to change. But you don't need to buy into that. Actually, your opinion matters, your stance matters. And of course, I think fundamentally, you as artists in performance in any kind of way are one of the best placed groups of people to help make change, to help communicate this message to others. I mean, art is a tool that's probably as old as time when it comes to storytelling and change making and protest and resistance. So yeah, please keep doing what you're doing. We'll keep doing what we'll do. And I really would encourage you to help take stewardship of the earth and believe in the power you have.
Thank you for coming today and responding to our questions. And to those of you who are watching at home,
please come to see our performance of a brand new piece based on nature. We are proud of the work we've created and would love to share it with you.
Hello. If you would like to support the work Streetwise do, then please visit our website. Thank you.